What's up, guys? Danny and Cthulhu here from the LOVECRAFT celebrating Lovecraft Month this March on our channel. Earlier this week, Pete and I got a chance to have a very special guest on, writer-director Stephen Kostanski of Psycho Goreman, which is available on VOD right now. The Blu-ray comes out on Tuesday, which we will be reviewing for the channel as well. You can check that interview up right now. He is a fantastic guest. He also directed The Void, which has some Lovecraftian themes to it. And when we asked him about it, he recommended this film, The Resurrected, directed by DanOBannon in the early 1990s. I say early 1990s because depending on where you look, this movie was either supposed to come out in the late 80s, 1991, 92, I've even seen 1993. It was one of those movies that had a really bad post-production cycle. But Stephen Kostanski recommended this as one of his favorite and one of his most accurate Lovecraft adaptations. And I gotta say, I went out, I bought the Blu-ray on Amazon. It was about $16, and it was well worth it. This is a really good little Lovecraft movie. It's based on the story, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, and Charles Dexter Ward is played by none other than horror veteran Chris Sarandon, who you probably know from Fright Night, as well as being the voice of Jack Skellington in A Nightmare Before Christmas. He is a scientist who is trying to unlock the secrets of death. And he's doing this by accessing old corpses of these like warlocks and wizards and trying to figure out this formula to add to their bones to kind of bring the dead back to life. The problem, of course, because it's a Lovecraft story, is that he's also going completely insane. What makes this a fantastic adaptation is, as somebody who's read a lot of Lovecraft, many of Lovecraft stories involve a narrator who is either telling a story of what made them crazy or talking to somebody who has gone crazy. And we meet the narrator here, a private detective played by John Terry, who you might know as Jack's dad from Lost. He is investigating this case. A woman shows up, says, "My husband went missing." That husband is Charles Dexter Ward, played by Chris Sarandon. And he has retreated to this like cabin outside of his house where he's doing these weird experiments with this mysterious doctor, Dr. Ash. And then eventually he retreats even further away out into the woods to this other farmhouse that has this amazing Lovecraftian basement setting with all these labs and all sorts of weird stuff going on. Really cool stuff. So the Blu-ray is fantastic. First of all, it's a Scream Factory, Shout Factory release. It is loaded with special features. You have interviews with members of the cast. You have interviews with the writer, who was Brent V. Friedman. You have interviews with the production designer, Brent Thomas, and he goes into tons of detail about what he did to kind of create this unsettling vibe. There's this one story he tells about creating a staircase, that a spiral staircase that narrowed as it went so that the actors got disoriented when they were on it. That is mind fucking cool, if you ask me. This film was directed by Dan-O-Bannon. Unfortunately, Dan-O-Bannon passed away a little while ago. He is most famous for writing the Alien films. He wrote Alien. He worked with John Carpenter on Dark Star, which was John Carpenter's directorial debut back in the mid-70s. It's kind of like this crazy little space comedy. But then he also branched off. This is actually only the second film he directed, full feature that he directed, after the iconic Return of the Living Dead in 1985. One of my all-time favorite horror comedies, one of the best zombie movies ever made. So, unfortunately, I read on IMDb a lot of O'Bannon's attempts for humor. There was a longer cut of the film. It was edited kind of beyond his control. And at the end of the day, I don't think he particularly loved the final result. But the final result is still a pretty damn good film. And if you read Lovecraft, it totally feels from the very, very beginning that this is a Lovecraft story. Pete and I just did a podcast review of Color Out of Space, which you can watch on Shudder. That review is going to be up a little bit later this week. But we talk about how that film, the new one with Nicolas Cage, directed by Richard Stanley, starts with a narrator and then goes into this cosmic Lovecraftian story. The Resurrected is very similar. You start with this narrator who's obviously disheveled and he's been through this crazy scenario. You get these pretty cool looking Lovecraftian monsters in the movie towards the end, and there's more special features about those. There's also this really cool interview with author S.T. Joshi, who's a Lovecraft historian. He's written biographies of Lovecraft, and he talked about this film in relation to the story, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. And he said that while Color Out of Space is usually considered to be Lovecraft's favorite of his works, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward is probably his most personal. The film takes place in, the Northeast, in Rhode Island, and where Lovecraft, in Providence, where Lovecraft did most of his work. And it's a very personal story to him. And his interview is really cool. That was one of my favorites of the special features. So if you're interested in seeing a pretty cool Lovecraft movie that you might have slipped under your radar, Chris Sarandon is a big-time star. Most people know who Chris Sarandon is, if not by name, definitely by face. DanOBannon, this is the guy that wrote Total Recall, Alien, directed Return of the Living Dead. People know who DanOBannon is. And this movie had slipped through my radar, slipped past me. So when Stephen Kostanski, a writer-director of horror movies and genre movies that I genuinely love, movies like Psycho Gorman, The Void, Manborg, when he recommends a film and says, this is a great Lovecraft adaptation, I'm going to take him at his word. I bought it. I love it. I think it's really good. I'd give it about a 3.5, maybe a low 4 out of 5 stars. It's also really, it's like an hour, 105 minutes, which is about an hour and 45 minutes with credits. So if it kind of flies by, there's a great score in this film. It's definitely worth checking out. In fact, that author I was telling you about, S.T. Joshi, he said that he thinks that this movie actually made improvements to the story from Lovecraft's original work. He actually likes the ending of this film better than the ending of Lovecraft's story. Lovecraft does tend, in his writings, I've read a lot of his short stories, he does tend to leave things sort of ambiguous for the most part at the end of a lot of his stories. The movie doesn't end in the most ambiguous way. There's a pretty good conclusion. And it's very, it hits all those Lovecraftian vibes. The fear of the unknown, the penetrating darkness, the very cosmic horror at points. There's monsters with globules and tentacles that remind you of the old ones. Very, very cool stuff in here. And again, The Resurrected. It's a movie that even a horror fan like myself, who, I pride myself at being an above average level of horror knowledge, and I had never heard of this movie. So you got DanOBannon directing, Chris Sarandon, John Terry. This is a fun little movie, and it's a really good Lovecraft adaptation. So speaking of that, right now on our channel, Pete just covered episodes 3 and 4 of Lovecraft Country. We're gonna finish that series later in this month. We have our interview with Stephen Kostanski up there. We have a preview of the new Amazon Prime series, Them, up on our channel. And like I said, later this week, we're covering in podcast form the Nicolas Cage Color Out of Space, which is streaming now on Shudder. So go watch that and check that film out. And then later in this week, up on our channel, we will hit you with that video as well. We're going to have more shorter reviews of Lovecraft stuff later. I'm going to do some 30-second to 1-minute movie quick reviews. So more and more Lovecraft as we go along. Cthulhu and I, for now, we're out.